Well, it's such an honor to meet Major General Charles Bolden. Well, let's just give a bit of your CV. A former astronaut, you served as the 12th administrator of NASA, and you were the first African American to head the agency on a permanent basis. And last night, you were honored with the inaugural Meridian Global Leadership Award for Space Diplomacy. And I think that we have to mention, he flew on 4 of the Space Shuttle Discovery missions. I'm in awe. So, such an honor to speak to you.
My pleasure to be here. It's an honor to be with you.
Well, we are at the Space Summit and about diplomacy. So how do you see the role of space diplomacy in fostering international relations, which are a bit fractious at the moment?
I think we've demonstrated through the 30 plus years of the International Space Station, space presents an opportunity for people who may not agree on anything to actually come together and to find ways to compromise to get a particular task done. Before we started this interview, you and I were commenting about what's it like to view this planet from the vantage point of space. And I think just that single action causes someone to, if they haven't thought about it, to completely change their perspective on the planet and our role in it. You know, you see, we aren't far enough away today with the International Space Station and other missions we fly to see the whole ball. But you can see a major portion of the curvature of Earth and everything. And what stands out more than anything else, I think, is this thin blue line that is our atmosphere. And all of a sudden, you realize that, holy gee, that's it. That's the only thing that protects us from death. And I also learned that we frequently talk about Earth being fragile. Earth is not fragile at all. Earth has been here for billions of years. And it's the people on the planet that are fragile. And if we don't take care of it, it won't be able to take care of us. So that's the biggest thing, is the change in your perspective.
Well, you mentioned the International Space Station. Can you share instances where space diplomacy played a role in resolving conflicts or misunderstandings? Well, that is the best example, but other examples, perhaps?
Oh, I think everybody knows, or maybe, no, everybody doesn't know, but people should know that probably the only reason that we are able to communicate with the Russians today is because of the collaborative relationship that we have on the International Space Station. You know, we're one of 5 partners on the International Space Station, and Russia is a major partner. In fact, the first 2 components of the International Space Station were provided by the US and Russia. And because we're the largest contributors, we tend to be the controlling partners in that enterprise. There are now, I want to say, 16 or so nations, all of whom contribute in some way financially or with pieces and parts and stuff. But there's nobody that contributes as much as both the US and Russia. So that serves as a great example. If you look at the way that we work through other programs that NASA has, one of my favorite is one called Severe. That is an earth science program where we use a whole plethora of earth science satellites and instruments on aircraft and the like to study the environment, help us understand about water resources and water resources management, help farmers around the world with crop development, help people to do disaster planning and relief. And you'd be surprised at the nations who participate in Severe. If you look at Severe Himalayas alone, that's about 9 different nations, and included in that is Afghanistan, Bhutan, China, the United States, and we all work collaboratively very well because our focus is on preserving the planet.
So what from what you've learned and what the nations have learned from the space station, how can we take that and solve problems like space exploration, or at the moment building moon bases on the moon that at the moment seems to cause tension?
Interestingly, to me, that's not what space station is all about. Space station is about doing things day in and day out that help us figure out how to preserve this planet. Much of the work on space station is in biomedical research. It's trying to help us solve everyday problems that people have around the world, whether it's osteoporosis in women, whether it's diseases like salmonella, or not diseases, but infections like from a salmonella, The development of the COVID vaccine, began decades ago when we started doing RNA and rMNA research on the International Space Station through something it's not simple, but it's a very simple experiment that's called protein crystal growth, where when you take away gravity, you take away that particular thing that ruins everything down here on Earth when you get right down to it, research-wise. But you get into space and you can grow crystals that are perfect, and they're very large, and then scientists can come back and a protein crystal can slice it and dice it, put it into an electron microscope, see how the protein is made, and design something that can either combat it or supplement it. And so that's kind of the way that vaccines have been developed. We look at blood disorders and the like. The advantage you get from flying in space is that everything in the human body happens so much more quickly. Somebody on a bed rest study for osteoporosis will lie in bed for 30 days at a time. The human body begins to deteriorate, if you will, when you go in space, like almost immediately. So we have to put countermeasures in place so that we stay strong and healthy. Main muscle we're worried about is our heart, so we do a lot of exercise, a lot of cardiovascular exercise. We're worried about strength in the musculoskeletal system, so our exercise includes pounding, running on a treadmill or riding a bicycle or doing isometric exercises and the like, so that the body maintains its strength and its resilience the way it is down here on the Earth.
So do you think some of the lessons we've learned we can take when it becomes a bit more competitive, like space exploration? How do we solve some of those issues?
You use the term competitive. I think when we talk about space exploration, hopefully we'll find that there's not a lot of room for competition, and there's tons of room for collaboration and cooperation. Space exploration is hard. Space exploration is very expensive. And space exploration requires the utilization of as many ideas as you can get from around the world in order to be your best. That's the reason you see the U.S. trying to get as many nations as possible to sign the Artemis Accords. I think today, as we're sitting here talking, there are 39 signatories. And it has a very simple purpose. It's trying to get nations of the world, no matter what your basic government framework is or what you believe, but it's trying to get the nations of the world to understand that if we're going to be successful in exploration, we've got to establish some norms of behavior. You can't have one nation going off doing one crazy thing and another one going off. Otherwise, we won't survive it.
Do you think eventually you'd be able to get China and Russia into those accords?
If we work hard enough, maybe. I don't know the answer to that. A lot of it depends on whether I'm not involved in the State Department nor NASA or anything right now, so I'm not sure what, if any, effort is going into getting them as signatories. We should be, because they are the major players right now. And when you talk about norms of behavior in space, you want to make sure that every member of the partnership understands the incredible threat of using kinetic weapons in space. We all of us, to include the United States, has tested anti-satellite weaponry. We learned very quickly that that's not a good thing, because wherever you hit an object with a kinetic weapon, things start to come apart. And so you have debris in that particular orbit and below for months, if not years to come.
Yeah, because in this week there was a resolution at the UN from the US to ban nuclear weapons in space, but Russia vetoed that. So do you have any opinion on that?
No, it's typical of the diplomacy that sometimes doesn't go on in the United Nations. But we keep going back and we keep trying to find out why. There is probably you and I would consider it some trivial reason that the Russians wouldn't sign it. It's sort of the way that the U.S. does. We don't sign everything either that's good, because we have some particular thing about the treaty or the accord that we didn't like, because we don't think that it may be something that would be inimical to us if we were the perpetrator. So we don't want to sign it. But we'll find out, I think, in time.
Yeah, I think the politicians hopefully will eventually answer those questions for us. So can we just...
The diplomats. I'm not sure politicians will answer any questions. The diplomats will they'll come to a consensus. And
Yeah, that brings us back to the theme of this conference. So you think that diplomacy is the way forward to solve
diplomacy
these
is the way that we get out of every conflict we've ever been in. Very seldom does someone win a war where there is not a diplomatic settlement at the end, such that people can agree to move forward from from the end of the war to try to restore some normalcy. If you look at the world wars, that's always been the case. When we ended World War II, we signed with the Japanese a number of accords, the Treaty of Mutual Security, and today we protect the Japanese because that was a part of the of the diplomatic agreement at the end of the war. We made diplomatic agreements with the Germans at the end of the war. Today, they're one of our biggest partners on the International Space Station and on the global stage, whether you're talking about NATO or other kinds of things. So it is always a diplomatic effort at the end where somebody signs their name on the dotted line. That's not necessarily a peace treaty, but it's an accord that says we're going to cooperate.
Well, I wanted to end off to ask you, how your perspective has changed from seeing our planet, but you said about the fragility of the humans, not of the Earth. And you talked about the challenges of muscle tone and everything. So if you look back, how do you see that experience that you had?
One of the greatest experiences in my life, not the greatest. I've had other things down here on the planet that I would say rival going in space. My time in 34 years in the Marine Corps gives me the respect and admiration of young Marines that I think most people in the world have no clue who they are and what they do. But they're young men and women, most of whom are somewhere between 23 and less. They just go where our country sends them and do what they're told to do and try to keep from having to go to war. So contrary to what a lot of people think, that's not good. And we recognize that probably more than anybody else. So we're always looking for a diplomatic out.
Well, you received this inaugural Meridian Global Leadership Award for Space Diplomacy. What does that mean to you?
I am incredibly honored to have received that, and I was the recipient along with a very dear friend of mine, Mike Suffredini, and he is now the CEO of Axiom Space. Most of my time as the NASA administrator, he was the program manager for the International Space Station, at least the program manager for the U.S. side of the International Space Station, and he and I both worked very hard to try to bring more and more countries into the ISS, to give more and more countries an opportunity, whether they were member nations, because there were only five signatories to the treaty that established the International Space Station. But in 16 or 22 nations in ESA, but there are still now countless emerging space nations that we want to give an opportunity to get to space, to have the opportunity to see it the way that astronauts today see it. And so, Axiom Space has been able to do that. They've now flown a number of nations that would have never had a chance to fly in space had they had to try to wait a chance to get into the International Space Station club.
So do you believe space should be democratized?
I'm not sure about that word. I hear people use the democratization of space all the time, and I think if it means what I think it means, it should be. Everybody on the planet should have an opportunity to participate in not just the exploration of space, but the experience of living and working in space. Everybody on the planet should have that opportunity. So if democratization of space means that we open up the opportunity so that everybody can do that, I'm all in favor of that. I tell people all the time, because I'm a person who had the experience to fly the space shuttle during its 30-year operational era. A lot of people talk about its technological advancement and its technological achievements and the greatest invention ever and stuff like that. And I said, none of that's going to mean a thing when we look back on it. Its greatest contribution to humanity is the fact that it opened up space, access to space, to countless more people than were able to go back in the early days of Mercury, Gemini, Apollo. I mean, during the Apollo era, we could fly 3 people at a time, and that was it. And they were almost always, in Apollo, they were always Americans, and most of them were military officers. And that's not the way to spread the word, to spread the gospel about the value of living and working in space. And shuttle, with the capability of flying 7, even 8 people a couple of times, people who were not scientists or not military people, but people who had some particular area of interest and expertise that we needed here back on the planet. And so I am hopeful that through Orion and through the commercial space sector, we'll be able to fly more and more and more people. And they don't all, you don't have to go to the moon. All you need to do is just leave the surface of Earth and get high enough so you can look back, and you will be changed. Your perspective will change.
Just a last question. So when you see them splashing into the sea, do you think, no, we should fly in like we used to?
I'm a pilot, so my preference is to come back to a runway and land and not plop down in the desert or in the ocean, but whatever it takes, and what's more efficient. The unfortunate thing so far is that we find that capsules, conical shaped craft, generally are easier to get back through Earth's atmosphere to withstand the pressures and temperatures of reentry. And so that's what we went to when we decided we were going to go back to the moon and on the Mars. Someday, technologically, material science-wise, we'll probably have the materials that allow us to fly a winged vehicle back and come back into a runway. But that's for another day.
Looking forward to that.
I am. Yeah, very much so.
Thank you so much, Major General Charles
thank
Bolden.
you.
It was so lovely speaking to you.
Thank you very much. I've enjoyed it.